What's going on, world? It's your boy at Big Game James _36, and this is a Den Media Group special report. We're gonna tackle into the draft a little bit. As everybody knows, obviously I'm rocking my Jaguars affiliation, but I cover the NFL as well as college. Specializing with the Jags and FSU, but really covering everything in the Southeast when it comes to sports. And one of the things that's really making the game better, especially for the casual fan, even in the draft process, because we're able to analyze things in real time and a lot faster. And you guys know that kind of geeks me up a little bit, whether it be about us talking over the years about FSU and the litigation with them getting out of the ACC, and we saw where that's come from. I love that. I love the stuff. I love the data. I love, as I jokingly and lovingly call it, the nerd things, even though I was a fullback and I was supposed to be brutish and brash. But what happens is the numbers and the data are supposed to help us explain what's on the field. And one thing that I came across a couple years ago, and it really, really goes viral every time they put up stuff, in particular last year when FSU had 10 guys go to the draft, we were able to take their RAS score, and really you just got a chance to see. And what happens, a lot of people say this person's unathletic or this person can't do that. And as a guy who was a sports performance trainer for years, it doesn't necessarily, you should be able to run a fast 40 if you have a high vertical jump. But sometimes things disconnect. But what are you actually with your size, your measurables, what actually is your score? How do you measure up to your peers? Is a 4.2 the end-all be-all when it comes to being a good athlete? Is the short shuttle the end-all be-all? How does it relate to other people in your position? And how does it relate to that kind of stuff over the years? People like me don't have the patience to be able to do this and get all the data. So thank the gods for the people who actually can sit here, do this, put it in an algorithm, and give it to us in a way that is just raw, real, and upfront. And we got my guy Kent Lee Platty, who's here with RAS, and he does a lot of other different things. We had a great convo, and hopefully this will birth a lot more convos, getting them on, having to be a friend of the show, where we get to talk about some things and just all about the many potential uses for what he has with RAS, but also we're going to look at some of the guys in the big three, some of the guys who are the top performers, some of the low performers, and maybe even ask, hey, what all does this really, really mean? Is it an indicator? Because it's an indicator, but it's not the end-all, be-all indicator with if somebody's going to be a good athlete. But again, for what I like to do, I want you to be the smartest person in the room. So if nothing else, you can take what we're talking about and regurgitate it to your friends at the bar. You have earned your stripes. So again, before we get into this, remember, each increment over 1,000 that we give giveaways. So there's $500. You got to watch the YouTube, though. We love you on the Twitter, but you got to come to the YouTube channel. So remember, once we get to 7,500, $500 is given away to a lucky listener of Big Games BS. As well as $200 for a member. Now, membership, you gotta be a greenie. You can go in there, figure out all the different levels of membership that you want. Once we get to 10,000 subs, we will be giving away a pair of season tickets to your favorite football team. It could be NFL, it could be college. The only college we will not give free tickets to is one particular college, and you kind of already know if you follow me enough. I love y'all coming in there. We will talk about your players, but I don't want to see a penny of my money go to support that institution. So that's how much my disdain is for them. But please consider growing the channel, subscribing, becoming a member, tell a friend to tell a friend, or just keep making certain things of this go viral. So we got Jaden in here who will be helping produce it. Jaden, did you get that link I sent you?
Yeah, I got the Google Doc.
Okay, cool. So that'll help us with that a little bit more. And if you could bring my guy, Mr. Platty, aka Kent Lee, up here. And Kent Lee, before we even start, with great beard comes great responsibility. But I really feel like if I could grow a mustache like that, that would be the only way that I would go about doing things. So that's a great mustache, sir.
Man, you got a perfect face size for it too, because you could get that real nice long one and curve right up. That would look dope as hell.
Yeah, man. Like, what do you have to do for that? Like, is that something like, you got to practice it? You got to brush it a certain way, or what happens?
It's called training your mustache, which sounds cooler than it is. You just have to comb it every single day. You got to put product in it, oils and lotions and things like that. It's preening. And you can always tell yourself, the Vikings did that kind of stuff. So at least there's that.
It makes you feel you're like, I'm taking more time in the bathroom than my woman, but like at the same time, the Vikings did this before battle, so it makes you feel better.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, but I mean, the results speak for itself.
Yeah. So let's talk about RAS. What does RAS actually stand for, and how did this come about?
RAS stands for Relative Athletic Score. The R does all of the heavy lifting with RAS. A, obviously, athletic score. Obviously, it's a score. But the relative part means that we're comparing a player to their position group and up until their draft year. So it's relative to a player's position group and up until their draft year. We do keep track of players after their draft year, but their official score doesn't go up or down once their draft year ends. It kind of locks in then. But what we do is we just compare all the 10 metrics that we have: height, weight for size. We have bench for strength. We have the 40, 20, and 10 splits for speed, the shuttle and 3-cone for agility, and then the vertical and broad jump for explosiveness. And we take all of those scores, and the number that you get is from 0 to 10. It's easier to understand as 0 to 10. You're never going to mistake a 0 for a good score. So, 0 to 10, 10 is going to be the good, and 5 is right there in the middle. And everything's stoplight color coded. Everything's red, yellow, or green. So by looking at it whether that's a good score when compared to their peers or a bad score compared to their peers. All those scores get compiled and creates an average, and then that average is also compared to the average for every other player at that position group to give you a final score. So at the end of it, when you get that final number, that's taking into account tens of thousands of pieces of data every single time we look at a player's score. But it's just an easy to understand number. Everybody can understand how percentile works. Everybody understands what 0 to 10 is. Everybody understands stoplight color coding. So the intention was just to make things easier for people to understand, to help bring people into the NFL draft and scouting and analytics. And I love doing this every year, and I love talking to people about it. And I feel like it's doing what it's supposed to be doing.
So when did this start?
So I started this back in 2013. I had started mulling about the idea before then, but in 2013 we had Le'Veon Bell coming out of MSU. And I am from Michigan, and I actually am not far from MSU, but at the time I lived in San Antonio. I wasn't anywhere near here. But Le'Veon Bell ran a 4.6 in his 40-yard dash, and the entire narrative around Le'Veon Bell up until the draft was how unathletic he was. And it does the player a disservice, and it does the fans a disservice, because a 4.6 isn't bad for a running back. It's not great, but it's not bad for a running back. And for a running back of his size, it's pretty good. And his other numbers, his other testing numbers were also very good. Le'Veon Bell was not unathletic. He was a very athletic player. But because of that 4.6, that's the terminology that they used. And I started hearing all those other terms. A guy is quick but fast. A guy is explosive. A guy is stiff. And those things don't mean anything to a casual fan. They're just buzzwords. But if we have a tool like RAS, we can kind of take what those tests are and we can give a little context to it. If we say a guy is quick but not fast, and you look at his score and he's got really good agility drills and really poor speed drills, that's exactly what that is. That's quick but not fast. So it gives you that context that the superlatives that we use alone don't really give you.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And obviously Le'Veon Bell ended up getting drafted, being a pretty damn good running back. And again, as you were saying, one thing I love about the combine is phrases and words that are used that really they're loaded. And my joke is that you could close your eyes and watch the combine on blind and have a good idea what race somebody is because of buzzwords that they use.
We could go into loaded language all day, man. The sneaky athletic thing that you get for some
coach's son, first one on the field, last one, the hard worker, doesn't give up. twitchy. Twitchy's never used for, which is unfortunate because I know some twitchy white guys or pilgrims, as we call them here in Jacksonville, that can go. We actually look for on my show every year. We call it exciting whites. Like this was the first year at the combine. We didn't get that exciting white, and I was hoping that I always say his name wrong, Basketball or Besh.
I love Scatterboo. I wish he had tested, man. I was so excited to see his score.
I was hoping that one of them tested, and I was like, okay, I know what we're going to do. They're going to have a whole set because Iowa was killing it now. Like you probably could, you could probably get a grant if you just, because Iowa, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's Indian for fast whites, but all the fastest white guys that have come out, and the biggest, they've had linemen and DBs come out of Iowa, and it's been really great. I love it. They actually got a track kid right now that's one of the fastest in 100 meters right now, which is ironic. But okay, so we went. It started off of making sure we kind of curtailed, or at least been able to give context to the narrative of a particularly big time player being unathletic and just what are those things say? Where have you seen it grow since 2013?
So around 2017, I expanded my database and I added players all the way back to 87, and I started to get more and more players. We're getting about 2,000 to 3,000 players a year now that we're able to put into the database. But what's really gotten it is just that it's become a kind of a natural part of our lexicon during the draft period. When somebody mentions RAS, they know exactly what you're talking about. They know that you're talking about their athletic testing and specifically their height and weight and all of those other measurables that I mentioned. So you get that specific thing that gets mentioned. And what I laugh about every year is that people who are new to it tend to react in the same way. It's always, well, this doesn't tell you whether a guy is good or not. And I made a joke because we made it all the way to day 2 in the combine before we had a "you can't measure heart" comment, because we always get that one. You can't measure heart. And I'm not trying to measure those things. I'm not trying to measure NFL success. We're not trying to show that these guys will be successful in the NFL, because there's 2,000 to 3,000 players a year and only 250 get drafted. And of those guys that get drafted, maybe 10% have long-term NFL careers. The success rate in the NFL is minuscule compared to the amount of talent that comes out. So you have all these guys that test really well and never even see an NFL field. And people think, well, the testing doesn't mean anything. But when you start to look at the guys who are successful, that's when you start to see most of these guys are really good testing players. Like there aren't a whole lot of low testing guys, but because those low testing guys are so rare, people remember those. I did a post, a longer thread before the combine when I was talking about different success metrics. I talked about Pro Bowls and stuff. There were 3 Pro Bowl offensive tackles since 2000 who had a RAS below 5. And everyone in the NFL, everybody who follows the NFL can name one of them, which is Orlando Brown. And one of the other ones is Trent Brown. So there's only 3, and 2 of them have our last name Brown. And they're basically the same type of player, really big offensive tackles with long arms and great length. And they play very similar type of game. But the fact that there's only a couple makes those guys stand out more, because you see a guy that tests poorly. Orlando Brown didn't test well, so this doesn't mean anything. Well, that doesn't work. That doesn't really work that way, because then you could look at the guy who does test well and say, well, this guy tested well and did succeed, so obviously these guys are going to succeed because they tested well. You have to take into account all of that data and look at it over time and look at it as a trend, and never sit here and think a bad score means they're going to fail or a good score means they're going to succeed, because it doesn't mean that. It doesn't even imply that. And it doesn't say that it's implying that. All it's telling you is how they compared to their peer group. The rest of that stuff, you got to watch tape. You got to figure out whether or not they can actually do the things. One of the highest scoring wide receivers that we have is a guy named Moritz Behringer, who came from Germany and barely played football. Hell of an athlete, but he barely played football. You know, you still got to know how to play football to be a football player.
It's a big part of it. Big part of the rules. Like, shoot, it kind of, I always tell people the reason why athletes feel like they're superior than everybody else, and I just coming from, is because we get treated differently than everybody else. But one of the first things I learned when I was in sports management major, I ended up changing my major, but I started there. It was a great concept. Sports is a microcosm of society. So when you actually just treat it and think about it like a regular job or things that you're trying to do, testing, just because you fail the MCAT doesn't mean you can't be a good doctor. But I would probably prefer a doctor that scored pretty high on the MCAT, right? Like, just because you didn't pass the bar the first go around doesn't make me you're going to be a bad lawyer. But you got to pass the bar. You got to pass. You have to do. There's everything we have is there are tests. That doesn't necessarily mean you can't be good at your profession or learn it, but the test is there so that we can see it. Like as I always tell parents when they're doing these high school combines or they're going to these camps and they didn't prepare. I was like, would you just let your kid take the ACT or the SAT without doing ACT, SAT prep? And most of them will be like, no, that makes no sense.
You want to minimize your asterisks, right? You want to minimize the number of asterisks you got next to your name. And if a guy tests poorly, that's an asterisk. If a guy tests poorly due to injury, we're going to see that this year with Gunnar Helm. Gunnar Helm's going to have a lot of people posting his card saying that they don't think he's going to be successful. We know now that Gunnar Helm injured his ankle during his first run. That's a pretty big asterisk next to his testing that says this is probably not representative of him as a player. One of my favorite RAS cards ever is Jarvis Landry, who scored a 0.27 out of 10. Wow. Because he went to the combine with a hamstring injury and tested anyway. And he I don't think he was ever going to test well. Right. But because he tested on a bad hamstring, he tested out as one of the least athletic players in the history of the NFL. And obviously, Jarvis Landry did not have a bad NFL career.
Not at all.
But that's that asterisk. And you can look back on and say, well, he was hurt. That was an injury that he had to deal with. Sometimes it's play style, and I always use wide receivers because it's a lot easier to visualize the types of traits we're talking about. But Anquan Boldin didn't score very well. Anquan Boldin's one of the greatest wide receivers of all time. But
shout out to my teammate.
He succeeded for a different reason, though. Anquan Boldin didn't win because the numbers don't reflect who he is. Anquan Boldin didn't have good testing, and the numbers don't reflect how he wins on an NFL football field. It's the same thing we were just talking about with Orlando Brown. The numbers don't necessarily show how he wins. Anquan Boldin ain't faster than people. He doesn't have to outrun people. That's not his game. He's not quicker than people. Again, that's not his game. He wins because he has some of the best body control we've ever seen by a football player. And he's extremely strong, especially for a wide receiver, but just in general human sense, he's incredibly strong. And when it comes to his hands, those are the strongest hands on an NFL football field. So you have a guy who has great control over his body, a great understanding of how football works, and he's incredibly strong. So when the ball is in the air, it is his football, right? And you have to fight him for it. And I don't think you want to fight Anquan Boldin. And even if you do, you ain't fighting him a whole game. You ain't doing that every single play for 60 minutes. You're going to die. So you end up with a player where the way he succeeds is not reflected in the testing that we're looking at. So those numbers don't really matter. When we talked about DK Metcalf a few years ago and people were up in arms because of his terrible agility testing, at what point in his college tape did you think to yourself, my God, I'm hoping he runs a good cone time, because if he doesn't, I'm going to be really worried about whether he can run in a straight line and catch a ball 60 yards down the field correctly. If a guy don't win that way, who cares? It's not part of his evaluation. If you see that and you think to yourself, I want him to be able to do that, I would like for this player to be able to do those things, then it's a flag for you. Because even if he succeeds in a different way, if you need him to succeed a way that you want him to, and he doesn't test well that way, that can be concerning, because now you're asking him to do something that is reflected into the testing, and he doesn't have those marks the way that you want him to. Same thing if you're asking a slow guy to start running fades. If a guy can't run very fast and you're starting to ask him to run fades, I would question why you're having him run fades in the first place. But you're gonna see some struggle there because he doesn't have the athletic ability to do that particular thing.
It's about getting the ingredients for what you're trying to cook. Exactly. I remember having this conversation with a friend of mine, Peter Ward, and he was talking about why he wasn't successful in the NFL. He's like, because I ran slants, digs, your occasional fade, like you're inside the 20 fade, because I had great ball control, could catch, and I was shifty. They started asking me to do stuff that wasn't in my repertoire because they drafted me and they wanted to fit me in there. And that goes back to what you talked about with Anquan. Like I used to joke and say Anquan used to jam DBs as opposed to DBs jamming him. Like he would put his paws on you and there was nothing you could do about it. But again, just very, very great examples about, where again, why you have to use it as a tool and not the end all be all. There isn't one thing that just like you have to. It's about getting the data, letting the data explain it properly to you, and then obviously you still have to, like, at the end of the day, you got to watch film and you got to be able to pick the guys that are the most relative to what it is that you are trying to do. And I like the Anquan. I like the Jarvis Landry one. I did not realize that Jarvis Landry scored that.
It's so fun to post that and watch people go, this stuff doesn't matter. And it's like, dude, there's so much context behind that. It's just funny to me.
I mean, like I said, the biggest thing is you're not gonna go. I don't remember what he. Another. I wonder what Joe Hayden's would look like.
So Joe Hayden's the guy I bring up a lot, though. So Joe Hayden, God, I just forgot his name yesterday too. Xavier Howard, the Miami Dolphins.
Yeah.
Both those guys have the exact same situation when it comes to their testing. Both of them tested average or below average at the combine. Both of them did so with an injury and tested. They got bad advice to test, essentially. I think both of them fired their trainers. I know Joe Hayden did. I'm pretty sure that Xavier Howard fired his personal trainer as well. Both of them went to their pro day and just knocked it out of the park. They tested extremely well. We're talking about the difference between a 4 or 5 RAS and a 9 point something. They both scored in the 9s extremely well when they tested at their pro days. And yes, there's some difference between pro day and combine when it comes to testing. That's just, you're in your own environment. You're going to do a little bit better. Not that much better. It is a very small measurable difference, but they were significantly better because, again, there's context there. There was an injury and there was some training differences that you have between one testing and the other. In RAS, they keep the score they have at the combine, whether they test well. Gunnar Helm, even though we know that he tested injured, that's just what his score is going to be. We just have to know that there's additional details there. And we provide tools on our site where there's a calculator on the page. You can go and change a player's testing to whatever you want to see like what they would score otherwise. So we can contextualize it. But it's important to keep more than just those scores in mind.
Definitely. Again, at the end of the day, you got to click on the tape and see what they can do again, buy the ingredients for the food that you're trying to cook as opposed to just buying the top ingredients. So what we'll do again, so are there any other applicable uses for the RAS score that you've seen, like whether it be other sports or even on the prep rankings and some of those different things?
So I'd love to see what it looks like for other sports that actually have the data. RAS requires a pretty sizable data set to be able to use it effectively because it's a relative score. So the amount of players you have impacts how your scores are going to look, how volatile those scores are going to be. We have like 3,000 wide receivers in the database. They're pretty solid. You can predict pretty reliably what those scores are going to look like. But if you're only working with a couple of hundred or less than that, you have a guy comes in that with some ridiculous score, it's going to throw everything else out of whack until you have enough data. I believe it's going to be applicable for other sports. Basketball, athletic testing is a huge deal for athletes. Measurement testing is actually much bigger than athletic testing, I feel, for basketball in my experience. But I've been talked to about hockey and soccer. I'm sure there are applications for it. It's just we need somebody with that kind of passion and data management skills to be able to put something like that together.
All right. Before we get into that, Jaden, what's the website that people can go to pull up that?
RAS.football, RAS.football.
All right. Jaden, can you pull up RAS.football? I want to do a quick experiment with one of my favorite kids right now, if you don't mind. Try to make sure we put the measurements in properly. So this again, you guys the guys who watch this show, you guys love going to 247 using the recruiting calculator and whatnot. So this is something similar to that. So all right, put Bryson Wright. All right, he's a wide receiver. We'll go College Mandarin University. That's the nickname for the high school because it's a lot of college guys. His hand is, I believe. So, what are you? How's it? Do you put in inches or how do you put it in there?
It's just in inches, and those don't get factored into the score. It's just so they show up on the card.
Okay, I know he's like 10'5" right now. Believe it or not, his kid's like 14.
Dang,
like not even 14 and a half yet. I think his arms were. I think it was like 35.
We had a running back. I just looked it up. I can't remember. We had a running back in the combine this year with 7 3/4 inch hands.
Oh, those are petite.
That is very petite. I think it's the smallest for a running back in my database. I haven't checked yet, but I'm pretty sure. If it's not, it's close.
Have a problem with fumbling. 205 is the weight. Oh, excuse me. 6'4" is the height.
That'd be 6040. We use the NFL's designations for height. So
okay, he ran a 4.55. He had a I believe it was a 2.6 in the 20 split, and he had a 1.6 in the 10. 225 is the bench press. You just want a number right there, right?
Yeah, just a number.
I know for a fact he can only bench it once. That's his max.
No, you just put one, not 225, man.
No.
You can do 225 that many times.
Just put one. Yeah. His vertical is 34. Broad will go. I think it's like 9'10".
So it would just be 9'10", just like that.
Yeah, this is broad. His shuttle was on 1.6.
That's the 4 point whatever. For the
my bad. I didn't mean to say. I meant
it's the 5. It's the 5.10.5 shuttle.
Yeah, 4.16. My bad, Jaden. No, 6'1". It's 4.61. No, he's not that fast. He's not that good. My bad. 4.61. My dyslexia is showing today. And his 3 cone is 7.3. So where will we?
There's a build RAS card right just right at the top of the screen there.
All right. So right now he wouldn't be the highest drafted guy.
No, but he's also a high schooler. He's still got a whole college program to work through, and then he's got pre-draft training. That 4.55, you can get that up so quickly when you're doing draft training and that 10-yard split too. Speed training is a whole industry now.
Oh yeah.
Same thing with the biomechanics when you're trying to do your explosion drills. Once you start getting into that stuff and understanding how muscle groupings work. Sorry, I don't think everyone wants to hear all the biomechanical crap, but
no, you're good.
You start getting to like the muscle groupings and how those things work. It starts to stack. It starts to stack on top of each other. So doing speed training alone is going to help your explosion drills because you're working the same muscle groups. You're doing the same type of things. The agility stuff is its own thing, and that's been really hard for high schoolers to get into because it's just not natural movements when you're a high schooler.
Right. Yeah, he's going to work on a lot of that stuff. I just thought it was funny because he's probably going to be the number 1 overall prospect in 2028. So just fun to see that. But it would be kind of cool to. Yeah, I actually am intrigued. One, if we use your current guy, I wonder if you say you need a lot of data. So you have about 3,000 wide receivers in your database right now.
Yeah, about 3,000. It's
I wonder if you could annually. I wonder if you had if you got enough people, like enough for that year, and obviously you're able to do it based upon how they rank that year. But that's still interesting, though. It's a good way to see where you're at. Like I'm gonna send that to his dad and be like, "Hey, right now, just tell him he sucks. He couldn't make it to the NFL today."
Hey, that's comparing against NFL prospects, though. I do have a high school database where I can compare against high schoolers, and we can get an idea of what he looks like with that. I'll pull that up for you on the side so you can see what that looks like.
Oh yeah, that would be cool.
That's not public facing. I can't pull that up on the website right now.
No, without a doubt, definitely understand that. All right, so that was cool. We got one of our Mandarin U kids on there. I may mess around with that with the coaches when I go up to workouts today. Let's talk about. We have the big 3 of Florida State, Florida, Miami. We have it's a Twitter culture. I say so. Like with this being shown, if we get some cut ups, if you get some very weird comments or weird DMs, I apologize to you. People are very passionate about their guys. Even though being up in Indianapolis, covering the Senior Bowl, doing all these different things, I've got a chance. I know, and I played with or against a lot of coaches, so I get some really raw analysis of some guys. So and then obviously we've got a chance to see some of these people up. So if we could pull up those things, Jaden, that Google sheet, and then we'll just go through some of these names. Okay, wow. The first one right here be Sam Brown from the U, originally from Houston. Shout out 912 Zone. He's from Savannah, Florida. Kind of walk me through what does this mean with his RAS score?
Yeah, so a lot of this, especially because of the guys at the combine, that's already the best. The guys they expect to be the best testers anyway. So you're generally going to see really high scores there. But when you're evaluating as a prospect and you have a guy who has good foot speed on an NFL field, when you see a 4.44, that's what you're hoping to see, right? If this is a guy that you think is fast and he runs a lower speed, maybe there's some concern. 41.5-inch vertical, that's insane. That's what that is. That's 98th percentile. All of these numbers are 0 to 10, and we did that so that it's easy to understand. Everybody can understand 0 to 10. That's what I said before. If you're wondering about percentile, just move the decimal over. So you just move it over 1, and you got the percentile. It is just percentile with one very tiny statistical caveat that only matters to me. But it's percentile. So, that's a 98th percentile, almost 99th percentile vertical jump for a wide receiver. That's very, very good. And depending on the type of receiver you have, having a really good vertical jump is usually a good thing for a receiver. You want guys that are able to jump and get up over top of guys. I mentioned the muscle groups before. Getting off the line is a big deal for explosion drills because that's the muscle groups that you're engaging is your lower body explosiveness, those lower leg muscles and your quads and all that stuff. You're all engaging those same muscle groups to get off the line that you do on a vert and broad. So if you have a guy you expect to face press a lot, those numbers look better. They're what you want to see when you're evaluating a prospect.
I mean, Sam Brown, that's when he originally went to the U from out of the transfer portal, that's what they were expecting him to be, that take the top off type guy. 4.42, obviously. 4.44 is great. I had no idea he could jump that high. And that says he measured in at 6'2".
Yep. Yeah, 6'2". So that's the height for the NFL. They do it's feet, and then the middle two numbers are inches, and then the last number is the eighths of an inch. So that's 6'2" and 2/8 or 6'2" and a quarter. And of course, he's got that Moses Malone 40-yard dash, the faux.
Mm-hmm.
Love seeing those. It's like one of the only other sport references I got is the Moses Malone.
The thing that I like the most with him, what I'm just looking at overall athleticism, would be the 10-yard split means to me is a lot more relative. I mean, obviously 40 is going to always be one of the things when I used to do performance training, I would go do interviews. They'd be like, what's the most overrated test? I say the 40. They're like, well, what's the test that you're going to train somebody for first? The 40. Doesn't matter what I think. It's what they use. But in that 40-yard dash, the 10-yard split is really what means a lot. 1.52. Anything, if you're doing sub 1.5, you're cooking. But if you're in the 1.5 range, that means you're pretty fast, man. Like it's gonna, like if you run that, if you're gonna win a go route, that's around the time you're gonna win it at 10 yards. If you're trying to win it at 20, the quarterback's sacked already, so it doesn't really matter. But real good stuff. And then so you only can take into account what you know. So that's kind of, so it doesn't average. We don't give them a 0 for not having it. It's just,
we don't penalize guys for not doing the test, and I get that. I get flagged for that a lot every year. But if we only did players that had all 10 metrics, that to me is more arbitrary than including guys who skip 1 or 2 or 3 of the drills. Because I don't care that a wide receiver skips the bench press. Why would I care? Why would I care an equal amount if they skip the agility drills? And I mentioned things like DK Metcalf. It hurt his draft. It hurt his draft in the ability in other people's eyes because of his poor agility scores. It shouldn't have. That wasn't how he won on the football field. So even if you do a drill and it's poor, if that's not how you win, that isn't a big deal to me. That's not something that really concerns me. Now, if a guy doesn't test and it is something that's important to him, it's something you feel is going to limit him, that's why we have that calculator on every player page. So you can go in and put in what you think they might have scored to see what that would do to the overall athleticism. But we can't give guys a penalty for something that they didn't do. And we can't reward players for skipping a drill either. If we gave them a 5, there's guys that are going to get like 0s and 1s in there. They just skip it and get that 5, right? So you don't want to reward guys for stuff they didn't do. You don't want to penalize guys for stuff they didn't do either.
Makes sense. All right, let's go to the next one. Now, again, a lot of this stuff makes me grateful as a guy who's like Sam Brown played for a rival of mine at Miami, and I'm assuming it's DK. He played for a fiercer rival. I have no idea. I had no idea that Florida had a guy that was this explosive. And just what are you looking at with these metrics? What does this tell you?
Yeah, so a little bit more of the same. You know, the size is a little bit smaller. He's more of an average size type of dude. And that's when you start paying more attention to the link. With, in this case, it's just more average, right? He's got average size hands, average size arms, average size height and weight. But you have a guy that running the 4.3. People have this this magical notion about 4.3s and 4.2s in the NFL. They think they're way more common than they are.
No.
A 4.3 is 98.6th percentile. That is the very cream of the crop. There aren't a lot of guys that run 4.34. So if you're looking for a guy that's faster than everybody else on the football field, he probably is. And if that's what you're looking for, this is the kind of guy you're looking for, a guy that has that kind of speed. He's also got the explosive numbers, both over 90th percentile. The shuttle drill it depends on the type of receiver for whether or not that matters. That measures start and stop, so your ability to stop, change direction, and move again. The cone also measures change of direction, just in a different way, and it applies differently. So if you're running more rounded routes, the cone drill might be more important to you. If you're expecting a guy to do a lot of stuff in a phone booth, that stuff where you're doing those quick shifty movements, shuttle might be more important to you. So this is one of those things that might be concerning to some NFL teams, because they're expecting that small and shifty guy, and in that area, he struggled a little bit. He came up with just about average in that area. That might give pause to some people, but they also might just look at it as a bad drill and have him run the shuttle themselves. NFL teams will have guys rerun these drills if they want to. It happens all the time.
One of the things, I was joking with somebody too, is like you can even that 4.34. That's what NFL Network showed us, and that's what like the combine, the official combine score. But if each team had two scouts, there's 64 different 40 times that guy's probably got, because they trust their watch more than they trust anything else.
We always say that a man with one watch knows what time it is. A man with two watches is never really sure. If your NFL teams will use their own watches for their stuff, they do get the official times, and NFL teams don't attend every pro day, and they get reports that come out for all the pro days that give them numbers, and they'll use those. But if they have their guys, and that's what they're storing is that data, they'll trust that, because then it's like to like for them.
Yeah.
Because this guy, maybe he ran a 4.2 by their guy, but their guy is a little quick on that watch a little bit, and they know that across the board he's going to be a little bit quick. So to them, those numbers mean a little bit differently, because they're looking at a guy with a different watch.
Yep. The guys you like are always a little bit faster.
Yeah.
but this is interesting, because again, it just shows me that maybe we didn't have that. I would have expected a bigger spot. I would expect to know this guy, remember a play that this guy made with some of these measurables. All right, Jaden, next. Again, running back from the University of Florida, Montrell Johnson.
And very similar. You look at size first with running backs, because you're thinking of type, right? So if you're coming in blind, you're looking at the size first, because you want to get a good idea of what type of running back he is. Bigger guys tend to be power backs. Smaller guys tend to be those shiftier guys. Guys in the middle could go either way, so that doesn't help us. But it gives you a good starting point, and he ran a really good 40-yard dash, so you know that he has that speed. He has good explosive drills, so you know that that's really good for him. Broad is generally more important than vertical for running backs. It's best to have both, but if you have one and not the other, that's good. His scores there were really good. Shuttle tends to be fairly important for running backs in general, because of the same reason as for wide receivers. You have that shiftiness, that internal quickness. Running backs are in a phone booth at the start. They start. That's their default setting. So much more important for them. Cone, probably less so for running backs, unless it's the real shifty, quick guys that you want out in space. Your scat backs, your receiving back types, that might matter a little bit more to NFL decision makers. Ultimately, he didn't do it anyway, but this is a pretty good overall profile. This is the kind of athletic profile you'd want for most types of backs.
Again, pretty good athlete. All right, going next.
More receivers. A lot of receivers out of Florida this year. Not a whole lot to add to this one, because it's kind of similar to the last guy that we looked at. He has the average size across the board and good speed, decent explosiveness, and then he didn't finish the rest of the testing. So can't really get a whole lot from that, but it's a good start to a profile.
I mean, good. I mean, yeah. When you're looking at the speed, again, another shout out to Florida's wide receiver room. Just not productive on the field. Go up. Next, don't know much about. I mean, don't know much about Badger either. All right, here's a linebacker from the University of Miami. He was a transfer portal guy. Pretty productive player. I could see him making it into the NFL. So, from a linebacker perspective, obviously another position that we haven't really talked about. What is this grade? What are we looking at with this grade?
Yeah, the first thing you look at with linebackers is their explosion, and he did plenty good there. Would you want to do a little bit better in the vert? I mean, if he had gotten a half inch more in the vertical, that would be a green across the board, I think. But you want a guy that's going to be explosive, and you want a guy that's not slow. Now, you know what I didn't say fast. I said not slow. Linebackers, I mean, yeah, you want a guy that can run a 4.4 or 4.5, right? That's great. But it's more important to just have a guy that's not a liability than it is to have a guy that's a speedster, because instincts are so important to linebackers. So generally you want that. Depending on the type of linebackers you use, the cone and the shuttle might mean a lot. It might mean nothing really. Alabama, I don't know if they're still doing that, but Alabama's middle linebackers, they tended to be that field general type where they kind of stayed in the middle of the field for the most part. Agility drills don't mean anything to a linebacker if he's staying in the middle of the field. So to guys from Alabama, that type of scheme, you wouldn't really care about those agility drills. But if you're a team like Denver or a team like Pittsburgh that uses their linebackers to move around quite a bit more, maybe they have them blitz a little bit more, that stuff starts to mean a little bit more, because now you're having them use those muscle groups again. Those are the types of things you're looking for, is guys that have that short area quickness, is guys that can bend an edge, which is what the cone measures. That stuff becomes a little bit more important. So it depends on what you're asking your linebacker to do based on what type of traits you're looking for.
Okay, and that 10-yard split and that shuttle, even if he's a Mike, if he's in the middle, that gives him that definitely gives you something. Obviously, and like you said, he's not slow. I always joke with people, I don't think a lot of people know how fast 4.6 really is.
Extremely fast for a linebacker.
Yeah. So, all right, we'll go to the next one. That's a good linebacker. He should be drafted early third day at worst. Tyler Barron, a defensive end that had a lot of hope. Again, another position. We got some red marks here. Like, so what are these red? But a lot of green, but the red marks. What are these red marks showing us in relation to D linemen?
So when it comes to size with RAS, this is something that it takes a minute to wrap your head around with the context of this one. So there is no ideal size for any position anywhere. There's no ideal size, no perfect size. So the 40-yard dash is easy because a smaller number is always better.
Right.
But with height and weight, it might not necessarily be better, and it might not necessarily be bad to be right around average, which is right where he is with the weight. So it's red because it's below average, but it's barely below average. And gotcha. 258 is not bad for a pass rusher. This is where we get into the traditional positional alignments, and I'm working on fixing this. I have an update that's coming tomorrow for positions that'll make our positions a little bit more versatile and open us up to doing things like edge and nose tackle and things like that, give us better comparative metrics against people's positions. But defensive end includes your small, skinny pass rushers, your spin move geniuses, which are generally shorter guys with lower weight, extremely good agility drills and explosion drills. Those guys are all included. Your 5 techniques, your 270, 280, 290 pound guys, those are included in defensive end. So below average in this instance for his weight is not really a concern, because it's not like 220. It's not egregious. It's not really an issue. But that's used to weight the other scores. So if you have 2 players that score exactly the same in every drill, but one guy's really big and one guy's really small, the big guy's going to have a higher score. It's more impressive that he was able to do that at a larger weight and with a higher height than it is for the other guy. With the explosion drills and the speed, it just matters what type of guy you are. If you're a guy that bends the edge and makes those really tight corner turns, your Von Miller types, Von Miller's the prototype, you want him to have really good agility drills, and it might concern you when a guy doesn't run the agility drills or does poorly. But if it's a guy that wins through explosiveness and being able to get off the line fast, you'll hear that speed to power mentioned a lot. If it's that type of guy, like your Myles Garrett types, The explosion drills are more important than the agility drills. So if this is the type of guy that he is, he did really well for himself because those explosion drills are really good. His 10-yard split's really good, and his 40-yard dash is really good. Those are the metrics that you want to look at for a guy like that. If that's the type of player he is, that's really good. Now, that poor bench, it depends on your arm length as to whether or not that is. And anybody who knows anything about physics, and I'm not going to go into that, don't worry, not that kind of math today. But long arms makes bench harder, essentially. It's just how physics works. So 33 and a quarter and an 1/8 inch arms, that's not too long. I don't think that really makes his bench any more difficult. If we was like 34-inch arms, maybe you start going, 19's fine for 34-inch arms. 19's a little bit low for a guy with his arm length. Not egregiously, not enough to make it a concern unless you're worried about his power.
Definitely. While we got you, so what would be an ideal RAS score? Like 9.3 is obviously great. So we want to get above 9 is where we would like to be, or is there
Nine's comfortable? The way that the colors work is anything below 5 is red. Anything above 8 is green, and then anything between 5 and 8 is yellow. So you heard me mention that it's based on percentile, and you might notice that's not an even number. That's not an even split. Like it's not a third, and a third. That's 50%, 30%, 20%, right?
Okay.
So those guys over 8, that's your top 20% of athletes. But when we start looking at success metrics, that is generally about 50% of your successful players, if not more. It's 50 to 60% of your successful players are in that top 20% athletically. And only about 10 to 15% of your successful players are in that bottom 50. The bottom half of athletes only accounts for anywhere between 10 and 15% of successful NFL players. Wow. So it's a much bigger difference, but that's when you start getting really deep into the numbers and start looking at the that kind of stuff. But generally, you want to be over 8 for your overall, for the composite part, or over 8 in the parts that matter for you as a player. We'll say.
Gotcha. All right, let's go to the next one, Jaden.
Corners. Corners is a weird position when it comes to athletic scoring because the first numbers you looked at aren't even scored, which is your height and weight are obviously, but your hand and arm length are pretty important for cornerbacks. 30.25 is a little bit low, but that'd be bad for most positions, but for corner that's not too bad. 30.25 is low, it's below average, but it's not super worrisome unless it shows up on tape. Shows up on tape, it's always a problem, right? If 4.49, that's not terrible. That's not great, but it's not terrible. It's a respectable 40-yard dash. And then his explosion drills are good. So those are all numbers that you generally want to see from taller guys. Taller guys, especially at corner, tend to do poorer at the agility drills. But that usually shows up on tape, and that's when people complain about it, is they didn't do it because they were going to test poorly. Maybe, if it shows up on tape and he doesn't do it at all, you already know that he's probably stiff. Go put in some numbers and see what you think that'll look like.
Only tall corner. The only one I know that can do agility drills really great is that's why they call him the prototype, and that's Antonio Cromartie, one of my teammates. We'll scroll down. This is a fodder guy anyway. Again, I don't want to. Yeah, I'm not concerned about that. All right, we got to talk about this guy. All right, man. This is a kid near and dear to my heart. Big boy, Joshua Farmer did not get into that 8. Like athletically, wow. So like we're already in a little danger zone. But talk to me about this card right here.
So I'm glad as you do then, because there's a lot of stuff going on this card that's fun, right? A lot of stuff's going on here. So yeah, there's a lot of yellow here. There's a little bit of red, and he isn't up over that 8. But let me tell you what he does have. He has 35-inch arms.
Yes,
so that is very long for arm. And you remember what I was just saying a minute ago about the bench? 26 is only 64th percentile for bench. That's not great, but with 35-inch arms, that is a very good score. That is a very good bench press. That's the same as if you, without looking at height or weight at all, you got a guy that gets 37, 38, 40 bench presses. That is the same level of strength when you're talking about physics here, because that's very long arms that are pushing up that weight 26 times. That's a lot. So it's very impressive, even though the overall score, because that's compared regardless of height and stuff. Even though the score is not great, that's very, very impressive. The other numbers that you want to look at for defensive tackles is the broad jump, and his broad jump is his best test. That's the best score that he had. As a defensive tackle, you are starting from a stopped stance. You're at a standstill, and you have to propel yourself forward, your entire weight forward using your lower body primarily. That's what the broad jump is doing, and it was his best test. So even though his overall score isn't the greatest, the part that generally matters for his type of position is really, really good. Now, that 10-yard split's going to be worrisome. These are unofficial numbers. The NFL, once again, didn't update the official 10-yard splits, so that might change. But you generally don't want to see a weaker 10-yard split from your defensive tackles. That's usually going to be something that's concerning. Defensive tackles aren't running 40 yards every play. The 40-yard dash, it is just a straight line 40-yard run. You're measuring whether a guy can get up to speed and maintain that speed over a distance. And that's something he can do because his 40-yard dash was at least good. So it is concerning about that 10-yard split, but his numbers elsewhere are good enough. I don't think NFL teams are going to be super concerned with that.
I understand Josh is a good kid. Came into college like 235 and was a defensive end. And then just got big. Just good. Him and Daryl Jackson both were teammates, both play at Florida State right now. Josh, good kid, man. I know he's gonna get drafted, but I'm glad you explained explained the card for him. So that should be some good intel right there. All right, go on to the next one, Jaden. Nah, going down to the. Oh, you know what? Yes, we gotta take a shot. Go back up. Never mind.
This was a little bit poor. I mentioned before the first numbers you look at are explosiveness for a linebacker. He's poor there, or okay, averages there. That's not great. 222 is pretty small for a linebacker. Even in today's day and age when linebackers are getting a little bit smaller, 220 is pretty small for a linebacker. The agility drills are pretty good. He didn't hit 8 and 7.99. He's right there, right? But good enough agility drills that it's respectable, and there's a lot of uses for that type of stuff. And of course, the 10-yard split being really good, that's a good thing. But overall, this is just kind of an okay card that has one significant weak spot and one significant strong spot. Not a whole lot to add to it than that.
Understood. That's good. All right. Go down.
Big boys. So nose tackles, if he's a nose tackle, so I'm making that assumption based on the size, but nose tackles, you don't care about your time drills for nose tackles. So nose tackles tend to have really low scores because that's half the card, right? That's 5 out of the 10 metrics are timed. But for a nose tackle, you care about the weight. Weight has to be above a certain point. You got to be big. You care about arm length. You want guys that are able to cover a lot of space. And you want your broad jump to be good. And unfortunately, his broad jump was his worst test. It was one of the worst broad jumps at the combine this year. So that's not going to look very good for him. And then his 10-yard split also relatively poor. So didn't have any of the combinations that you want for a good nose tackle score, but his speed is good enough for his size. That's very good speed for his size. Let me get that right. That's good speed, even though that's all red. That's good speed for his size. But if you're thinking of him as a nose, the other metrics are probably going to give you a little bit of pause because you really want somebody with a little bit more burst than that at that size.
Right. So again, not saying that he's not going to be good, just some athletic red flags that are a little tougher to explain. But even on but I'm glad you're explaining the speed part because it just depends on, you have another update coming. So even the next years, it'll be more accurate where you can put him in as an edge, a nose, or just what kind of D lineman he is. But if we're just looking at him as far as a guy that can play multiple positions on the line, probably not the best athletic score. You would have to go to the tape, and I don't necessarily. He was okay. Go to the next one. Okay, yeah, we haven't done an offensive lineman yet. So, what is this telling? What does the RAS tell us about a lineman? Obviously, the arm length has got to be pretty good, right?
Arm length is good there. This is one of those things where that red is telling you pretty much all you need to know from an athletic standpoint, right? This is not a guy that you're going to look at and be like, that is the type of athlete that I'm looking for in general. 316, he's not big enough to make those numbers a little bit more palatable. And 6'7" is great. 6'7" is great, especially with that length. We have guys in the league that are just big, and that's their whole thing. And if that's how he plays, this is where we come back to how they play. If that's how he plays, then this card is fine, because those guys, the metrics in general don't really mean a whole lot. It's about how your understanding of where guys are going to be, their pass rushing plan, and having a counter to what you're going to be facing on the football field. You don't need to listen to me talk about it. I could probably talk about it and sound fairly educated on it, but you are much better served looking up interviews with Orlando Brown, where he talks about that. He is extremely well spoken on that particular issue. And describes it in a way that uses his own personal experience, and it's phenomenal to hear the guy talk about it. You should absolutely check that stuff out. If that's the type of guy you think that Brandon Crenshaw Dickerson is, then you can go look at that and get a little solace in the fact that he didn't test all that well. But I don't know enough about the player to be able to speak to it specifically.
I don't trust people. I don't trust men with 2 last names. So it throws me off. Just make a choice. But 6'7",
hyphen's aggressive.
Yeah, it's just not 6'7", 3 under 320. That means he's long, not as massive. So like, I don't remember. Don't remember. I can't deal with it. I don't draft him for the Jags. Ironically, before any Florida fan comes in the comments and listens to the trash to us, I wanted your guard in the first round last year. That was the guy who I particularly wanted to get, but I like Brian Thomas Jr. It worked out for us. All right, go down to the next one. So we got a lineman in there. Or is that it, Jaden? I don't think that's it. Yeah. Hold on. Got to talk about
he did. Yeah, he did. He at least did the broad. We didn't really get a whole lot out of Ezra Thomas. But the size drill, all the size metrics are exactly where you want them to be. We mentioned there's no ideal size, but this is good size for a corner, and the only drill that he did fine in. So,
gotcha. AZ, you lied to me, man. You told me you were going to do the drills, man. Now I can't even get a good RAS score. You're messing up my content, son. Now AZ is a really good, he's, to be honest with you, unless he's going to run a sub 4.4, which I think he can. He's a press man corner that has very little film of him ever getting beat. So, like, honest God's truth, if you didn't run it now, it's probably not gonna change your stock too much. But yeah, we don't have anything to break down. So go to the next one.
Oh, so this was for the guys that raised their stock versus guys that didn't. Yeah, I just brought up a couple of the guys that got 10s. We had 3 of them this year, though one of them isn't really a 10. I'll explain that in a second. But Shamar Stewart has the highest RAS of any defensive end ever. The guy that he's taken that from is some nobody. And I feel bad because there's a guy out there that's a real person that's going to feel angry that you're calling him a nobody. But it's just some random guy. And then the rest of the guys at the top of those defensive end rankings are Mario Williams, Myles Garrett, Sean Merriman, Kyle Vanden Bosch. Just the most insane group of pass rushers you're going to get. And then some guy was at the top. So Shamar Stewart being the guy, if he holds on to this score, will be nice for me because he's probably going to go fairly high in the draft. And at least it's not just some guy anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But production, this is where you get into that argument, production versus metrics. You know, he only had 4.5 sacks in college, but this kind of testing is really good. And if you want to project a guy to the NFL, these numbers are phenomenal.
All right, let's go down a little bit more.
The next one is Nick Emenwari, who is one of the top ranked safeties in the draft in general right now. Anyway, so people talk about him rising from the draft. He was already a well thought of prospect. So I don't know that this moves the needle any further, even though this would take the top spot for safety. That's a lot of green and a lot of 9s. I don't know that I need to explain a whole lot beyond that. That's very good, right?
It kind of explains why he's one of the, like, this is where the film matches the card.
Yeah. And I actually posted that he had a 10 at strong safety, free safety, cornerback, and he almost got it at linebacker. Jeez. So it's a lot of athleticism there.
Gotcha. All right. Go down, Jake.
So Isaiah Naylor was the other 10, but this is one of those not really things. The 10 right now, the actual top guy is Calvin Johnson. And Naylor does not beat him. The reason he shows up as a 10 is because we have a lot of wide receivers. And RAS is 4 digits. So eventually you get 9999, and that's where he's at. Like there's 4 nines there, and it rounds up. So he's the second highest wide receiver after Calvin Johnson. That's good company to be in. There's a lot of really good players up there when it comes to receivers, but there's also just a lot of receivers.
Do we have any more Reds outside of the University of Florida, or was that the last guy?
Oh, that was it for Florida guys. Yeah, that was it for the Florida guys.
No, I was just saying in general. If we had any other, like, just get somebody bad.
Oh, there were no bad scores from Florida, any of the Florida guys this year. I don't think, other than the ones we showed. That was it. Yeah, that was everybody that had a score.
I was just saying in general. Tyler Booker. Yeah. But this is just a lineman. We don't really know if he's just a massive guy.
He's pretty big, and he's got that length and stuff, and he's got a lot of fans. Tyler Booker is one of the top-ranked offensive linemen in the draft, though. So scoring this poorly is probably going to affect his draft stock a little bit. We haven't had a guy get drafted in the first round since 2019 with a RAS below 5. So if he is, he'll be the first one in 5 seasons. 5 seasons. So we don't get that very often. Booker might be that guy. He's got a lot of really good tape, and a lot of people are very high on him. If you think that he needs that athleticism to pull, and I've heard mixed on that, whether or not he pulls a lot and whether or not you need him on the move a lot. To me, if you need him on the move, this kind of card is concerning. If he's one of those bigger guys who's just there to people move in front of him, it doesn't really bother me all that much.
Size 11 hands. Holy crap.
So that's a big fist pit punching at you.
Scroll back up. Jaden, I thought we had a Georgia guy with some red.
Starks. Yeah, Malachi Starks. This was one of the more controversial ones, I guess you'd say, when he tested, because Malachi Starks is considered a top 10 player by a lot of people. And Nick Emenwari also considered a top 15, top 10 guy. But generally, he's below Starks. And with Starks testing the way that he did, that's a little bit concerning for some people. Safeties, you want to have a combination of 2 of 3 things. You want to have good speed, good explosiveness, or good agility. You want 2 of those. He's only got 1. So from an evaluation standpoint, when it comes to athleticism, this is probably going to be a red flag for some people who would have expected more from it. Obviously, if you like his tape, you're going to like his tape, and that's perfectly fine. Guys that have good tape who become successful doesn't mean they don't have red flags. This is just going to be a red flag on him. So doesn't change his projection into the NFL for most people, but it's one of those things you got to consider.
All right, and we'll just scroll down, Jaden. We'll just get one. We'll get one more.
I think that might have been it. Oh, we did have one more. Oh, Harold Fannin. I wanted to bring him up because this is one of those guys that everyone thinks is terrible because of his testing, but that's not terrible. Harold Fannin's he's just a divisive player that a lot of people expected to test really poorly, and then he didn't. But he didn't test great either. And people like to use that as an excuse of, he'll never do anything in the NFL. Tight end, you really want those elite athletes. More than any other position, you want the elite athletes. If a guy isn't an elite athlete, you just want him to not be a bad one. And this is nowhere near a bad profile from an athletic standpoint. So this is where you get into removing your own biases from something. If you thought that he was going to test poorly, this is a good card. This is good testing if you thought he was going to test poorly. If you thought he was going to test great, this is a bad card because you expect him to be great and he ain't. Most people expected him to be in the middle, and he was. And your entire evaluation from an athletic standpoint should pretty much stop there because you've confirmed what you already saw on tape, right? So if a guy tests okay and you expected him to test okay, you're done with athletic testing. You don't have to look at it anymore. The numbers are done. You move on to something else. Start looking at his catch rate or his catch radius or his route running or blocking, all that stuff. Start looking at that stuff. But yeah, don't overthink players is the point.
Definitely understand that, man. Well, I'm taking a lot of your time, man. I really appreciate you coming over here and helping me understand this thing. It's great to put a face with this this scoring system that I've been just casually using for the last couple of years. I'll probably try to get you on some post-draft stuff, especially with the Jags, with what we have, and looking at the RAS scoring based upon where we drafted them and trying to get some projections, man. But thank you for explaining it, man. It's a phenomenal system. And guys, make sure you go check the website out. Go play around with it. Just put your own kids in there. Let them get judged in comparison to the pro athletes. But for those who are trying to follow, where can they follow you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at MathBomb. I post on there fairly frequently, maybe not as frequently as previous years, but I post on there quite a bit. And I'm over on Blue Sky as well, and I post in there a little bit more frequently lately. Mostly it's football. I mentioned I got a new video game that I'm playing right now. I'll post about that too. You're just stuck hearing about that. But for the football stuff, you can get me on Twitter, you can get me on Blue Sky, and you can always hit me up on ras.football. I love talking football. I love talking ball. Hit me up, talk some football. Let's do it. We got months of this stuff left.
All right, man. Appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Cool, man. All right, have a good one.
All
right.
Well, there's again quick show. There's a couple show notes. We will be breaking down the ACC versus FSU and Clemson today around 4 p.m. I just got the information from my man with Rohan Law. We're going to be going in depth on that. So for my FSU, my ACC people, you'll be getting some more content today at 4 p.m. We're going to take this down. We're going to break this into some shorts, a lot of stuff to chew on. Again, we had some rivals that are bragging about how many guys that got to the combine, and now it kind of maybe shows you why their record was the way it was. They may not be as good as what you thought they were. So, and even with the top schools, we saw Georgia athletically put out a dud. We saw Alabama athletically put out a couple duds. We've also seen a guy whose athleticism is through the roof, but he's only got 4.5 sacks. So from the SEC. Does it always translate? Not necessarily, but it's easier to cook a phenomenal Michelin star meal with Michelin star rated items as well. So that's one of the things that, you got to continue to push for. But there's a lot of data and a lot of different things that can make the data make sense as well as make it not make sense. So outside of that, appreciate you guys for chopping it up with me. I'll see you guys at 4 p.m.